Thank you. All right, welcome to those of you here for at the museum and also to those of you joining us virtually. It is at the museum, first Friday of the month. What? Oh, I don't know. Do I want the lights on? Can you see this? Yeah. All right, we'll leave it as it is. Okay. So it's so helpful to have the blinds closed. A couple of bits of news. We are, of course, going to the Art Institute of Chicago today. Also, I want to point out, Candace and I have got our art t-shirts on today. This is, you'll notice them also on the dining room servers today. It's a little bit of a mobile art exhibit. Our silkscreen class had 3 tasks. So when I teach a class, one of my 10 or 12 week classes, I like to teach sections of it so that everybody can feel like they can be successful by the end. So the second exercise we did was to do shakers, salt shakers. And each of these salt shakers, the challenge was to accurately control the outside of the shaker, but to let loose and be creative on the inside of the shaker. Regrettably, my 18-year-old daughter took one look at these shirts and says, "Mom, are you handing pills out in the studio?" No, we are not distributing medications in the studios. So anyway, they're salt shakers, okay? They're salt shakers. So anyway, we are, my other piece of information I need to give you is that we have this month, the May at the museum. We also have the June at the museum, which will be focusing on quilts. And then we're going to be on hiatus for a couple of months because of construction. So you know that. This will not fit easily into the studios, and so we've just had to lay off of it for a little bit. But today I'm really excited. I learned all kinds of interesting stuff about the Art Institute of Chicago. I know many of you have also been. It's the kind of place you could spend a lot of time. There's more than, I think they said, 1 million square feet of display space overall. So it's very large. It's grown over years. But there's really some interesting history about it. So before we get into the art, what I've tried to do, because I cannot possibly show you all of the pieces of art, I've tried to give you a bit of a chronology to let you know kind of how the museum developed, how it came to be, and some interesting information about its history. Have to start with the lions. Have to. They're kind of iconic, both in Chicago and for the art museum. So they're the work of Edward Kemys, K-E-M-E-Y-S. He was not going to be an artist. He had absolutely no ambition to be an artist whatsoever. He loved animals. He was born in 1843 in Georgia, Savannah, Georgia. He grew up in New York. His mother died, and his father moved with the family to New York. He swung an axe for the engineering corps that made Central Park. That was his job. And then one day he saw an old German sculptor modeling a wolf's head at the zoo, and he kind of watched him for a while, and he said, "Well, I can do that." So he did. And I really admire that kind of ability to think outside of the box. He started with modeling clay. Took him 3 years. He made his first sculpture. It was of a wolf. He just taught himself how to do it. And he proposed it to Hudson Bay wolves quarreling over the carcass of a deer. Very long title. For Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, it was accepted. He quit all his other work and he just started modeling animals. His wife was also a sculptor. They worked together. And the thing he was most excited about is he'd always wanted to travel west. That was the first thing he did. He went west. And he started hunting animals, catching them, dissecting them. It's a very Da Vinci kind of approach, understanding every sinew, every bone, everything to be better at his craft. He says that this pair of lions is the hardest thing he ever did. After he came back, he went to France. After he came back from the West and continued to refine, he went to France. He displayed his work there. And at the time, he went to the old Art Institute. Originally, it was the corner of Michigan Avenue and Van Buren is the original location of it. And so he went there, and little models of his work were being exhibited in there. And he, from that, got Brian Lathrop and his wife as patrons. And so those patrons supported his work, and that led him to the Lions. Biggest, hardest work that he did, they tied into the actual construction of what is now the current site on Michigan Avenue of the Art Institute. The two lions are not identical. One of them is on the prowl, and the other one is in an attitude of defiance. Yep. And there is your defiant one right there on the edge. And I wanted to show you, so that was a postcard from 1930. There's a more current one.
Rachel, are they bronze?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And there they are, numerous drawings, numerous studies, a lot of work went into them, but they have become truly iconic for Chicago. And in fact, they show up on a lot of maps as their own entity in Chicago, which I think is kind of interesting, but they've held up just beautifully. So as I started to get into this, I found some rather, what initially seemed odd to me on the Art Institute's website, really talking about Indigenous people. And I just thought that the words were curious. So did a little bit more research. And one of the things that I didn't know about the museum is that it was placed in the middle of a Native American village. And it was really the confluence of 3 different tribes. And the land was taken. The people were disrupted, off they went, and this was built. This is a map that I thought was really fascinating. So the green areas are villages, the red are walkways, and the green are waterways. And basically, the entire area was just colonized. And what's fascinating about it is the developers, as they were building Chicago, talked about the grid system. We all kind of know about the grid system in Chicago. They talked about the grid system in Chicago being an aspiration. But if you look at the two, so this is where the Art Institute is. You can tell this is where really Grant Park, all of this is right here in the same location. And the major thoroughfares remain, for the most part, the trails that the Native Americans formed as they were living in this area. So this was kind of an area, they call it the traditional homelands of the Council of Three Fires. That's the language. So it's Ojibwe, Odawa, and the Potawatomi, all focused in that particular area. And the Art Institute is part of a larger effort. So it's not just this, but what they have done is come out with a statement, is that the Art Institute of Chicago is located on the traditional unceded, which means taken, homelands of the Council of the Three Fires. Other tribes, Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox also called it home. So this was a major hub for trading and travel through this particular area. And I just thought you would find it to be a little bit interesting. And the Art Institute has been one of the key players. So all of these kind of landmark organizations in this area have come out and recognized that this land was not theirs to build upon. And further, that it destroyed what was there before for the most part. So it was built, the building was built for the Art Institute in 1893. It was built on the occasion of the Columbian Exposition, the World Columbian Exposition. And so it was a World Fair It was supposed to celebrate the rapid growth of Chicago and commemorated the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus. Not surprisingly, the Native Americans in the area were not supportive of this. So the statement from the Native people, Simon Pokagon was the leader of the Pokagon band of Potawatomi. He wrote this quote about this space. In behalf of my people, the American Indians, I hereby declare to you, the pale-faced race that has usurped our lands and homes, that we have no spirit to celebrate with you the great Columbian Fair now being held in this Chicago city, the wonder of the world. No sooner would we hold high Joy Day over the graves of our departed fathers than to celebrate our own funeral, the discovery of America. He was not one to mince words. So while there's been a land acknowledgement, it's just part of a larger effort, as I've mentioned, and one of those to be aware of, and it's really relevant for this particular one. There is something known kind of loosely as NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So that came about in 1990. I had no idea it existed. Anybody know that existed? I had no idea that existed. But what it was the idea that human remains of Native Americans belonged to the tribe, belonged to the land, belonged to their community, and in an effort to return them. And that meant also returning them out of museum collections, not just personal collections. So that's another one. I'll explain this picture I'm showing you in just a minute. This is not the Art Institute of Chicago. But as part of that, as long as a lineage could be identified, clearly identified. So if I just wanted to walk into the Art Institute and say, I am 452nd Native American and I want that, I couldn't do that. There has to be a lineage established. I do not have any Native American ancestry that I'm aware of. I don't want to misrepresent that, but there has to be lineage established. There has to be research. The FBI is managing this. That's who's been charged with it. This picture is a panoramic view of a man in Waldron, Indiana's basement. His name is Don Miller. And when FBI agents raided his home, he had over 42,000 pieces of Native American possession. Several hundred of those were human remains. The FBI is still working their way through that, and maybe forever. Because one of the other things that the Native American and people who are working with the FBI on this have requested is because the DNA process is so destructive, they don't want these items DNA tested. And so they have to try and identify their origin based on other things, x-rays and things that are non-destructive to the item they're allowed to do. But that definitely slows it. So any Native American tribe who can legitimately establish cultural connection to an item may take possession of that for their own museum collection. So this gentleman, his name is Don Miller, Waldron, Indiana. He is what is considered to be in the category of a pot hunter. That's what true archaeologists call them, are pot hunters. So these are people who really go above and beyond. This is their hobby, their life work. They consider it to be interesting. They want to go get these things. And some of us do that if we go, say, on a walk down at the Wildcat and we see a pretty rock and we pick it up, right? That is some version of pot hunting, right? We found something we'd like to have, and so we take it from its position of origin. Well, this gentleman really took that above and beyond. And so that's why a lot of what you are seeing when you go and look at Native American exhibits and museums, really be alert to that. I didn't even realize how, I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this component of it. And so I would just, well, they have a lovely Indigenous people section to this museum, to the Art Institute, but understand those things will be increasingly vague. Yes.
Would it be possible to turn one of the lights off so we can see?
Sure. No, thank you. It's hard to know the right thing to do. Some people want to be able to see my mouth and some people want to be able to hear me and see the screen better. There we go. Is that good? Isn't that something though? This gentleman in Walden, Indiana, he would have Boy Scouts in and different people would come in and he really treasured this collection. But it's not really his collection to have.
And where is Walden?
It is southeast, I think, of Indianapolis. That's it. So with that preface about the land, about the landmark language, and about the collection of indigenous artwork, and particularly it's the funerary and human remains, things that are most disturbing for obvious reasons. So because many of the Native American cultures would bury treasures also with their deceased person, and those were basically grave robbing is the layperson's language for it. Now this is the original entry to this. The Chicago Academy of Fine Arts actually was 1879. Was the start of it. And then as they prepared for the 1893 World Columbian Exposition, they negotiated with the city of Chicago, the trustees negotiated with the city of Chicago for a structure on Michigan Avenue. And the design is very classical, as you can see. It had big goals. They officially opened December the 8th of 1893. And this is the original entryway. It is not ADA accessible, if you're wondering at all. So right away, what was interesting is you have a museum, do you have a collection? So the first kind of major gift was a collection of French paintings by Mrs. Henry Field. And there were also some kind of immediate additions that were made. One of those was the Fullerton Auditorium and the Ryerson Library. And then after kind of things started to build, they did something radical. It's a little bit of the spicy history of the Chicago Art Institute. They hosted in 1913 the Armory Show. So the Armory Show was modern art. It started in New York. The first big exhibit of the work was in New York, and then it is common to do a smaller portion of that work would go to other museums. So about half of the New York exhibition, Armory Show, came to Chicago. It was really the avant-garde European painting and sculpture. What was interesting about it is way back then, 1913, the museum purchased many of those items that came in from the Armory Show. And that is what started the modern art exhibit, the modern art wing, 100 years later, almost a little over 100 years later. Those were kind of the landmark pieces that began the modern art wing. So it's kind of interesting. Mrs. Field, she made this donation, and this is actually from a news brief from her donation. And it's tiny print, so just bear with me here. She gives the custody and care of the entire gallery of oil paintings collected by her husband during the last 20 years of his life. This was from the Chicago Daily Tribune, June 4th, 1893. It's a collection valued at that time at $300,000. The collection includes works by Corot, Millet, Rousseau, Delacroix, and Constable, and many other artists of the Barbizon school. The Tribune observes the collection will be a valuable addition to the treasures of the Art Institute and a fitting memorial for the man who spent many years in getting together that which is conceded by some critics to be one of the great private galleries of oil paintings in the country. So this was really, Art Institute is open and that's great, but the Field collection donation was the thing that put them on the map. Really some remarkable pieces of work. And what was interesting is that Mrs. Field was a big fan of Tiffany's work. And this was the design that she asked Tiffany to put together. And Mrs. Field's requirement, now this has since been modified, but her requirement was that the entire collection be displayed together at all times and it be in a completely fire-safe room. She's very specific about what she wanted in terms of exhibit. But then to ask Tiffany to please design the room for her husband's exhibit. Henry Field was, this is a portrait of him on the left here. This portrait was painted by Leon Joseph Florentin Banat. My pronunciation is terrible. Every month I tell you that and I still mean it. But it was painted in 1896. It's quite large. It's 51.5 inches by 35.25. It's a very impressive portrait of Mr. Field. So he was a millionaire. He was the brother of Marshall Field, if you know that. This is one of the paintings, and I'm a fan of Millet. I just really like his humble work. And this is an example of one of the paintings that was brought in. This painting is very creatively known as, I love the title of this, Peasants Bringing Home a Calf Born in the Fields. So and this is the part I found to be really interesting about it, this particular painting was only about 27, 28 years old when it came to the Art Institute. It was still quite fresh. You have to think about the timing of some of this. It was not, we think of them, look at them and think of them as classics, but it was not a classic at that time. Another one that's interesting, we all have known, if I say to you Cubist painters, generally speaking, you have an opinion about them. But this one was one that I found to be really exciting about it because it's a Chicago-based artist and it's a fantastic story. So they put this armory show in, and again, it was quite controversial because, well, I'll just use this word. Chicago's Dial magazine, Edward Hale is the writer of that article. The air was full at present of utterances concerning futurists, cubists, neo-impressionists, and post-impressionists. Post-impressionism. It was not pretty work. And the people of Chicago liked pretty work at that time. They were not fans. But one artist who was really excited about it was someone named Menier Dawson. This is his work. He was so excited about it. He was an artist, but he was not a very confident artist. This is what I loved about him. Not a very confident artist. He went to New York and saw the exhibit, the original full armory exhibit. He was so excited. He was so excited, in fact, that he bought a couple of pieces of work. He took a leave of absence from his job. He was an architectural engineer. He took a leave of absence. He went to Europe. He saw the old masters. He painted all the way through. And then this came along and he went to New York and he was so excited about it, so excited by the artwork and doing the artwork, that he went home and he started painting more. And then the show came to Chicago, and one of the organizers of the show came over for dinner. And he showed him his artwork, like he's a hobbyist, like I just do this in my spare time. And he said, oh, I like that one there. Let's name it this, and I want to hang it up in the show. Can you imagine? He'd be like, can I pour you an after dinner drink? But it was so affirming. He stopped being an engineer and he worked the rest of his life as an artist. But this is the piece of work that was that made it into the Armory show in Chicago. And after this, he did a few other smaller shows. He never hit it big, really. Shows in Milwaukee, I don't really put you on the map, but He really is interesting in that he is a Chicago-based artist who got his break at the Chicago Armory Show. And so I wanted to show you his work. I'm sure we can look at another Picasso, but we won't. Okay. So the next period of time that we're going to look at is 1916 to 39. So this is the year when the Art Institute built over the tracks. And that was quite a large expansion. And one of the things that happened, there were a few different things that also happened with the collection. One of them is the Helen Birch Bartlett Memorial Collection, which had this painting in it. So this, I'm sure you're all familiar with, this is Seurat. This is Sunday Afternoon on La Grande Jatte. So it was painted in 1884. Really famous pointillist painting. If you're downtown Lafayette at any point in time, you can look at the Lafayette mural of this, that's kind of a mock on this particular painting. It's right next to where the old big Bank One used to be, the Bank One building. I don't know what it's called anymore. It used to be the Bank One building downtown. But this painting was really interesting because it was also not well received. So painted in 1884, bedlam, scandal, and hilarity were among the epithets used to describe what is now considered Seurat's greatest work. It was first exhibited in Paris, and then Helen Birch Bartlett purchased it and then later donated that as part of her bequest to the museum. It was a rather large gift. There were some other major donations during this time, some major collections that people had. This is a Monet, Arrival of the Normandy Train, 1877. So this one, and I included this particular painting because I think we don't often think of Monet with this type of work. You say Monet and everybody says ponds, right? We all think about gardens and ponds. Water lilies as far as the eye can see, but this is a Monet work. And it was donated. What was remarkable about this particular donation is at the depths of the Depression, it is the single most comprehensive art gift in the Art Institute's history. Martin Ryerson, all of this art, so many pieces, such a comprehensive collection. And as I understand it, and I want to say this, but I want to tell you it's a little bit speculative because the source wasn't rock solid, but became a matter at the height of the Depression of taking care of these paintings, putting them in a place where they could be cared for reliably and kept safe. And so that was how the Art Institute ended up with those. Pages are stuck together here. The Art Museum, the Art Institute did not, however, just focus on things you smack on the wall, paintings that hang on the wall. So think back to what I said, landmark, we're going to be familiar of the place we live and of maintaining history and saving history. This, anybody know what this one is? No, this one's kind of interesting. So during the material shortages that followed World War II, there was kind of a halt to the Art Institute's building additions. And then they just started making some changes in the 1950s. It took them that long to kind of have the resources to make some changes. But they did things that were interior a little bit more. So they grew their professional staff. They renovated and revised inside of the existing structures. And then as they got into the 60s, the Morton Wing was built, and that linked the gardens to the Art Institute. That's when the land came along and the gardens were linked to the Art Institute. And then in 1970, there was a huge increase in the number of visiting artists and also the number of people coming in to view the exhibits. So the 70s were kind of this pivot point where they really outgrew their space. And so they built this with the east side expansion. So in there were new studios, classrooms, a film center, public spaces for the museum, and the addition also housed the reconstruction of Louis Sullivan's original Chicago Stock Exchange trading room. It was slated for demolition. It was very controversial. And they rebuilt the whole thing inside the Art Institute to keep it. And then all that exists in its original site is just a display. There's a monument there. The idea of moving an entire room inside another building, though, or one building inside of another building is interesting. And there was a lot that had to be recreated because the building was in such disrepair when it was to be demolished that much of it had been looted or stolen or damaged by water and that type of thing. So we're taking a big hop forward here. We just left the 70s and now we're moving into the 80s up to the year 2000. So they'd kind of been building a little bit here, a little bit there to fit the collection as it was growing, change lighting, take advantage of technology. But then they built a new building in 1988. And this one's interesting because it is the first American space designed by architect, I'm going to say it wrong, Tadao Ando. This is him here. He won a Pritzker. He is very accomplished, but this was the first time anyone in America gave him space in which to design. And this is what was unique about it. They're backlit. It is a backlit area to display its Asian collection. And this particular piece of it was fascinating because it was backlit. It's concrete, but backlit to exhibit these Japanese screens correctly. What you think about is not typically what you would see if you walk into a museum. After he did this, his very next project was to complete a house in Lincoln Park. I don't know where it is, but I'm kind of fascinated to go find that. Now this next one, I'm actually going to show you a video if the technology works for me, because I wanted to move into some other new acquisitions, more recent acquisitions. If you haven't been to the Art Institute in a while, you might not be as familiar with them. And what I thought was fascinating, I tried to give you a selection because they've not gone in a very linear direction in terms of building their collection. They're kind of all over the place, and it's beautiful. The way that they've done it. So this next one I wanted to show you, this is the Hartwell Memorial window. It was made by Tiffany Studios. This is, if I can get it to work, a little 5-minute video that I think you'll really enjoy because it's the only way to see this thing up close if you're not there. Nope. Go back. I told you, if it works, it's great. Let me see what I can get here. I want you to work, please. I've heard sweet talking it helps. I'm not really sure if that's true or not. I also tell my children they have to sweet talk the chickens to make them lay more eggs, and I'm pretty sure that doesn't work, but it's really fun to watch. All right, let's see what we can get there. This is a relatively new piece, as you'll hear when we get into this. And it's just exquisite.
It's massive, it's huge. When you stand in front of it, you feel small next to that landscape. And yet it's in the smallest details where nature comes to life. I think it's really hard to fathom how large this window is in an abstract. It is about 25 feet high by 16 feet wide. So that means this window is in fact as tall as, or even taller than many two-story houses in the United States. In 2017, I was approached by the Community Church of Providence, Rhode Island, to see if we had any interest in acquiring an extraordinary window that they had had in their church for 100 years. And it was just evident from the very beginning that this was something we absolutely wanted to have in the collection.
This window was a commission made by Mary Hartwell in honor of her husband, Frederick Hartwell, who was a deacon of the Central Baptist Church in Providence, Rhode Island. The window depicts a scene of Mount Chocorua in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, a beloved peak in the New England landscape, and one that had great resonance with the Hartwell family.
Mary Hartwell would have chosen Tiffany Studios because at that time they were the preeminent makers of glass products.
Louis Comfort Tiffany had started a glass company in 1885, which would then become Tiffany Studios. And the firm had become synonymous with technical innovation and radiant brilliance in their materials, in their composition, and their design.
The woman who designed this was named Agnes Northrop, and she was, in fact, Tiffany Studios' leading landscape window designer.
Agnes Northrop had a long and successful career at Tiffany Studios. She stayed with the firm for 5 decades and really worked her way up. She had an amazing amount of creative agency with her projects and worked far more independently with these brilliant, one-of-a-kind designs that were coming their way and commissions that were coming their way, like the Hartwell Memorial Window.
From the front of the glass, it's very hard to tell how much effort has gone into the aesthetics that you see.
These colors aren't just on the surface of the glass, they're in the material. And they were constantly striving with chemical formulas, with different material combinations, like creating sheets of what they call foliage glass, which is where shards of glass were thrown onto another molten color and went through the rollers, where you get this dazzling confetti-like effect that conveys dappled light coming through the trees.
How did they know that stacking these 5 different pieces would produce this result? Because many times when you open up the layers and look at the colors without illumination, they don't seem to correlate at all. You'll have a green and a streaky brown and a plain blue with no discernible features whatsoever. And then when the light shines through them and you see why, it is extraordinary.
One of the things that was actually really exciting was that we discovered evidence of cold painting. And cold painting is actually a method of painting on the glass after it's been fired.
And one of the discoveries we made is realizing how some of that work took place when it was being installed at the church.
Sometime during the process it broke. They took it down again, repaired it with putty, painted it on the back to try to make the color blend better, put it up again, didn't quite work. Took it down again, painted it more. So this artist installation team was touching up their work until the last possible moment.
And so ultimately, this is a further sign of how they had a plan, they executed the window, but then they brought it to Providence and they realized they needed to make some changes to accommodate the space, to accommodate the light, to ensure that it really met their standards.
I hope everyone who comes to see the window for the first time, multiple times, experiences that sense of awe that I certainly felt the first time I saw it, and I still feel every time I get close to the glass.
At some basic level, art is about human expression, and this is certainly an incredible testament to that. It's a testament to Tiffany Studios' ingenuity. It's a testament to a particular moment in the art history of the United States when so much innovation is occurring in the medium of stained glass. But I think it really transcends that, and it will have a much greater and universal appeal.
If I could beam a message back to the Tiffany Studios in 1917, I would want to extend my utmost respect for their skill. It's a way of thinking about permanence and longevity that I think is definitely disappearing in our very consumer material disposable culture. People who had such a phenomenal amount of skill that knew that they were building something that was meant to last the test of time.
Just thought you would enjoy that video. Yeah. And what I think is interesting about it is that the church in Rhode Island similarly big. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm glad you all remind me what I'm supposed to be doing here. The church in Rhode Island sold it so it would be protected. The Art Institute picked up the stock exchange so that it would live on. The artist who had, or the collector who had the collection during the Depression donated so it would survive. And that's the part I think is kind of interesting about it, is this idea of art and legacy. It's just something to consider. It struck me about this particular museum that hasn't necessarily struck me about some other ones that we've looked at. And that brought me to why they've continued this collection the way they have. And so I offer you this humble pot. This pot is an amazing piece of American history. So this, and it's a relatively new acquisition for the Art Institute. So this one says LM, and at the end you can see it's got 1857 Dave. Dave was a slave, and he was owned by LM. And it's kind of interesting. Typically, if you think about a pot, if you've ever taken a ceramics class from me, you know, we sign it on the bottom if we're proud of it. Sometimes people say, do I have to sign that one? So, well, I at least need to know who it belongs to, you know, put your initials. But Dave is David Drake. He was born enslaved around 1800. He learned the art of building, throwing, and glazing pottery in Edgefield, South Carolina, in a pottery district where the white owners forcibly compelled enslaved African and African-American people to produce stoneware that was used for storage, food ingredients, and the like. So David Drake, he kind of asserted his identity in rather extraordinary ways. For 40 years, he left his mark in clay. The earliest attributed pot to him is late 1820s, until his self-identification as a turner. So a turner is the word that would be used to describe someone who throws pots in a wheel. And he was established as a turner in his first post-emancipation census of 1870. So for that roughly 50 years, he would sign on top of the pot. And sometimes he would write poetry. So one of them says, Dave belongs to Mr. Miles, where the oven bakes and the pot biles. July 31st, 1840. Or I wonder where is all my relation, friendship to all and every nation. That was from 1857. A very large jar which has 4 handles, packet full of fresh meat, then light candles. I made this jar all of cross. If you don't repent, you will be lost. May of 1862. So over 100 works by Drake are known of, and around 40 of those have his verse on them. It's not clear how he learned to read or write, because during that time, 1740 and 1834, South Carolina legislators passed laws against teaching enslaved people to read or write. So it would have been illegal for him to learn to read or write. But it's clear enough that this is done with the full knowledge of his enslaver. LM is the name of his owner, and his owner has clearly authorized him to do this. So this jar, owned by the Art Institute, is 18 inches high and 17 inches across. It's very large. It would have been a food storage jar. And what's interesting about it is the artistry of it. Because a lot of times, if you think about a jar, the glazes would be very caustic, chemically somewhat unbalanced during that time in ceramic history, and they would have just dumped them in a jar, dumped it out, let it dry, fired it, right? But look at this, almost floral designing. He's used different colors of glaze and added extra glaze up at the top, and this that you see is considered to be the mark of his hand. So we just would have taken his hand, stumped it in, and had the mark of his hands be on there. But what's kind of amazing to me about this is that he was allowed to make his mark. And the Art Institute sought that out as part of telling a story, as part of that landmark information. Yeah, I would want to clean this one up. So this one's kind of interesting. This is currently on exhibit through the summer. The artist's name is Ikshan Adams, and he is a weaver, a textilist. And the name of his particular show, so he's from South Africa. That's his hometown or a home country. A predominantly working class township in Southeast Cape Town, so like a suburb of Cape Town. And his question on this is, how would you treat someone differently if you knew everything about them or nothing? And so this weaving, so all of this is woven, and this is the idea of it kind of floating up out in terms of knowing them. This rose, this is a rose, is a separate weaving, like a focal point of it. It's really fascinating. I thought it was fascinating work, just the installation of it. It's a little bit disturbing to me. But he has, this is on display through the end of the summer, and it's actually a large multi-room exhibit. And so it's really, I kind of saw the preview of it and wanted, kind of interested to go see it myself because it's really fascinating. But it does pose an interesting question. Would it change how you treat someone if you did know everything about them?
What's being woven there?
So this is woven.
Yeah, but
And this is the stranding up.
out of what? Thread?
Oh, yeah. Wire, thread, textile, I mean, everything. He actually has one whole section of this that's made of old linoleum. So I don't think there's anything he won't use, which is common of artists from South Africa. You use the resources that you have. This next one is a sharp deviation. So this is also on exhibit right now. So it's artist, designer, and writer William Morris. He founded the Morris and Company 160 years ago in 1861. And this is hand-printed wallpaper. Can you imagine? It is yep. And so this company that he started, this is really about the aesthetic of it. He did wallpaper and tapestries. And beyond the aesthetic offerings, the home furnishings company had deep philosophical objectives to elevate handmade objects over mass-produced goods and to bring art into the everyday. And then finally, and I want to end with this because I couldn't for a minute touch upon everything that's there. I couldn't. The Art Institute of Chicago hosts approximately 1.5 million people annually. If you care to go, Saturday's the busiest day. I don't recommend it. But these are a couple of classics from their collection. On the left, of course, American Gothic. And it is, this is where it lives, is at the Art Institute. I'm sorry, on the right, that's the right, American Gothic. On the left is a piece by Jasper Johns called Target, which is really a very apt name. I wanted to show you though, I'll see if I can get the links to work now. Hey, it worked that time. Woohoo! So this is the museum floor plan. I just wanted to show you kind of the enormity of it. Lower level, and I know this is very small, but you can get an idea. Art of ancient Egypt, textile, Miniature, they have a remarkable miniature collection at the Art Institute, photography, architecture, and design. Film, media, the chapel windows, arts of the Americas. So that's where you'll see that kind of Native art, Native American art. Arts of China, Japan, Korea. Really prints, drawings, moving up to the second floor. Contemporary, Impressionism, architecture and design continues. Chicago architectural fragments, so that's maintaining that local piece, that local history. Arts of Europe, the Tiffany window is there in that main space. Still more. The modern art and the sculpture terrace as well. So it's a really kind of, here's a whole exploded view of it. It's a lot of art. And what I was excited to discover about this, if you have any desire at all to go look, they have a remarkable amount of their collection, very, very, very well organized online. So if you go to their website, Art Institute of Chicago, their collection, you can sort. It's really well effective searching. So you can search by anything. You can also go through and pull different categories of art. Or if you just feel like it, you can look at it almost like a magazine and just go through and pull different things. And what I was kind of excited about is that it's just very well organized as well in individual paintings and pieces of art. So you can scroll down and they give you some really nice history. And then the other thing that they do that's lovely is, so publication history exhibition, the provenance in terms of the order of possession of it. And so there's a couple things to look for if you go to these. Over on the side, if there are archived articles or interviews or other things, previous press releases, they're over there on that sidebar. So you can kind of, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but you could spend hours on one particular artist. You also can come in and these links are live. So Georgia O'Keeffe is a live link. But then for many, if you scroll down to educational resources, this one doesn't happen to have one on it, but you can link out to different resources that are would be used by like educators to go and find additional information who wants to download. Sometimes there'll be lesson plans, sometimes there'll be kind of similar art, that type of thing. So I just would encourage you, if you're ever a gray or gloomy day, or you need to sit in, or you're just curious about what they have, but you don't want to walk all that way, you can go to the Chicago Art Institute really from the comfort of your own home to a large degree. A lot of museums are doing this right now, and that is, if you only have an hour, look at this. Well, I will tell you about their 1 hour. If you only have an hour and look at this, take a motorized scooter, because you cannot look at everything. You can't walk from everything to everything in 1 hour unless you've got a good sprint and stride. So, but that's really, that's the end of our talk today in terms of content, but I do really encourage you to continue to look and explore their collection. It's phenomenal, and it's remarkably well curated in terms of access to information on it. Anybody, any questions for me? Or we move on. Do y'all want to go to the Art Institute now? Yeah, there is some, I know. Maybe that's what I said. So you know, I am trying to work out some field trips while this area is closed. So one thing I'm hoping to do, I'm working with Chaplain Laura, we'd like to take a tour of local churches, the art in local churches. There's some beautiful artwork, architecture, different styles of stained glass, different statuary and paintings. So we're going to get together next week and see if we can get that planned. But I'm very open to other day trips. So if you think you have an interest, let me know what that might be. I have taken a group to Kokomo Glass before and we had a wonderful time. It is a very treacherous factory to walk through. It's beautiful, but you got to bring your A game mobility wise. So I don't know if we'll go back to Kokomo glass or not. We'll see. I'm open to it. Anybody, anything else? All right. Well, I have flower arranging again starting in 5 minutes, but thank you very much for joining me today for At the Museum. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. That work okay?